Hi guys, in this presentation we are going to discuss the Keynesian and classical point of view about cyclical unemployment. Actually, classical economists believed that there is no such thing as cyclical unemployment. However, Keynes believed that cyclical unemployment is possible. On what grounds are they saying that? We'll discuss it further, but before dealing with that, we must see what cyclical unemployment is. As you can see from the slide that there I have written that cyclical unemployment is mass unemployment which occurs due to demand deficiency. It occurs during a recession when demand for goods and services falls, demand for labor falls, and that's why the firms in a recession make the workers redundant on mass level. For example, during the subprime mortgage crisis in 2007 in the US, when there was financial crisis in the US, demand level fell drastically and lots of firms made their workers redundant, and that led to mass unemployment. So when the unemployment is occurring due to major demand deficiency in an economy, that is referred often as cyclical unemployment or demand deficient unemployment. And as Keynes was of the view that it exists, that's why sometimes it is also referred as Keynesian unemployment. Now, classical economists believe that if aggregate demand would fall, it may create unemployment for a temporary period of time, but it would be automatically corrected when there would be a downward pressure on wages and prices, and as a result, cost of production would generally fall, aggregate supply curve would shift rightward, and economy would automatically restore to its full employment level. Therefore, classical economists believe that this unemployment would be very temporary and there would be no government intervention and it would be automatically corrected. However, the Keynes believed that prices and wages are not flexible, as the classical economists are believing. Prices and wages are usually rigid downwards. They're not flexible downwards. Therefore, a general fall in cost of production would not take place. Aggregate supply curve won't shift rightward, and economy would not restore to its full employment level automatically. And they believe, therefore, that a long time of unemployment, long spell of unemployment is possible, and which would only be corrected by government intervention, by the expansionary fiscal or monetary policies. And that is why Keynes believed that cyclical or demand deficient or Keynesian unemployment is definitely possible for a long period of time, and a lot of human sufferings would be involved, and therefore government intervention is indispensable.
Oh my God, क्या है ये?
Don't panic, just sit back and relax. Watch the diagrams and listen carefully. Now see the first diagram, please. In the first diagram, you can see that I have plotted aggregate demand curve, short run aggregate supply curve, long run aggregate supply curve in the diagram by taking price level on the y-axis and national output on the x-axis. You can see that aggregate demand curve and short run aggregate supply curves are intersecting each other at full employment level, where price level is P and national output is YF. Y denotes full employment level. We can see that equilibrium level of output lies at full employment level, right? Therefore, there is no downward or upward pressure on price level, and there is no backward or forward pressure on output to change. Economy is in its both short run and long run equilibrium. In the diagram 2, I have shown that later on aggregate demand is falling. You can see in the diagram that aggregate demand curve is shifting downwards, intersecting the short-run aggregate supply curve from a different point at y1, which is indicating that due to a fall in aggregate demand, price level has gone down to P1, and national output, the equilibrium level of national output, is now at y1, which means that a recessionary gap has been developed. That recessionary gap has been labeled by a red dotted line, and that is AB, that is recessionary gap. Recessionary gap means that it is showing unemployment because economy has gone from full employment level to below full employment level because of demand deficiency. Now, classical economists are of the view that when recessionary gap would develop, which means that when unemployment will take place, that unemployment will create a downward pressure on wages and prices. For example, when aggregate demand is falling and unemployment is taking place, the bargaining power of the trade unions would become weaker, and those workers who have become unemployed, they would be ready to work on lower wages. Those sellers of factors of production whose supply is unsold now, they would compromise on the prices, and therefore cost of production would generally fall. And when cost of production would fall, the short-run aggregate supply curve would shift rightward to short-run aggregate supply curve 2, intersecting the new aggregate demand curve AD1 at full employment level. So the logic of the classical economists is that given aggregate demand would fall below full employment level, that would create unemployment, and that unemployment would create a downward pressure on prices and wages, due to which the cost of production of firms would fall. As a result, aggregate supply would increase, which will take the economy back to full employment level even at a lower price. So they believe that market mechanism on macro level would automatically work and would automatically correct the recessionary gap. Some unemployment might be created in the short run, but that would be automatically corrected due to a shift in aggregate supply curve. Therefore, there is no long-term spell of unemployment. Therefore, there is no need of government intervention, and therefore they don't believe in cyclical unemployment. Right? Isn't that simple? However, some people are always critical, and so was the John Maynard Keynes. But John Maynard Keynes, in his point of view, was not very wrong. He was quite correct in his view, and let's see what's his opinion about this situation. Keynes pointed out that, for instance, wages are set by collective bargaining between trade union and the firm. When the agreement is going on between the trade union and the firm, and if the management of the firm is ready to increase the wage rate, that increase in wage rate would be for a specific time. Management would demand from the workers, from the trade union, that before that time, for example, they have decided that for 2 years, your wages are going from 12,000 to 15,000, but before 2 years, you cannot demand more than 15,000. And it is obvious that firm in the agreement is agreeing that firm will not also reduce the wage rate. Whatever wage rate has been set, that is for a specific period of time, that cannot be increased or cannot be decreased. So let's suppose that a collective bargaining between trade union and the management occurred, and a particular wage rate was set at W in the diagram. Later on, after a few months, major demand deficiency entered into the economy, because of which demand for labor fell. Now the point is that the wage rate W has been set for 2 years, and before 2 years it can neither be increased nor be decreased, because it has been become official. It has become an agreement between the workers and the firm. Therefore that agreement cannot be breached. Whatever wage rate has been set, that will last for 2 years. There would be no downward pressure on wage rate. Wage rates could not go down. Insiders would never compromise on the wage rate for the outsiders. As a result, when demand for workers would fall due to demand deficiency, that would only create redundancies. Wage rate would not go down. Actually, Keynes pointed out that classical economists are assuming a free market or perfect market in both the labor market, factor market, and the labor market. But markets are not usually free. Markets are not usually perfect. There are imperfections in the market. And trade union power is one of the imperfection in the labor market. So when demand for workers would fall, trade unions may not compromise on the wage rate. Therefore, wage rates won't go down. Secondly, in the case of other factors of production also, we would see that there would be monopolies and oligopolies. And when the aggregate demand is falling or demand deficiency is occurring, then monopolies or oligopolies may not compromise on their prices at once, because they have monopoly power, and therefore the wages and prices may not go down. So actually the basic assumption of classical economists is wrong. They are believing that wages and prices are 100% flexible downward, but the Keynes is believing that wages and prices are not flexible downward because of market imperfections, because of nominal rigidities. Therefore, when wage rate and price level is not falling, then cost of production is not falling, and then aggregate supply curve won't shift rightward, and the problem of unemployment would not be solved, and there would be long-term unemployment, human sufferings, and there would be need of government intervention. In the given diagram, you can see that the supply curve initially is horizontal because it is showing the fixed wage rate from the collective bargaining, and when demand for workers is falling, that is creating only unemployment. Initially the Q quantity of the workers was employed. Now only the Q1 is unemployed, but the wage rate is still the same. It means that wage rate is not going down. So the basic difference between the opinions of the classical and Keynesians is that classicals believed that wages and prices are flexible downward, but Keynes is saying that prices and wages are not flexible downward. Therefore, no automatic correction is possible. Cyclical unemployment would definitely take place for a long period of time, and it cannot be corrected without any government intervention. Thank you very much.